He was sitting quietly in seat 1A, clutching a worn leather briefcase that he refused to put in the overhead bin. To the flight manager, Brenda Miller, he looked like a problem, a man who didn't belong in first class, let alone on her plane. She thought she was protecting the airline when she picked up the phone to call the police. She thought she was in control, but she had no idea that the man she was harassing wasn't just a veteran. He was a high-level courier on a classified mission. Seconds after she demanded his arrest, a single ID card didn't just silence her. It shut down the entire airport. This is the story of the flight that never took off, and the instant karma that ruined a manager's life. The air conditioning inside Chicago O'Hare International Airport was blasting, but Isaiah Washington felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. It wasn't from heat. It was from hypervigilance. At 52, Isaiah moved with the stiff, calculated grace of a man whose knees had seen too many jump landings and whose back carried more than just physical weight. He wore a simple grey hoodie, dark denim jeans, and scuffed Timberland boots. To the casual observer, he looked like a construction worker heading home after a long shift. But it was what was handcuffed to his left wrist, hidden beneath the long sleeve of his hoodie, that mattered. He approached the gate for Flight 492 to Washington, D.C. His grip tightened on the handle of the brown, weathered leather briefcase. It looked antique, something found at a thrift store, but the lining was lead-shielded, and the locking mechanism was biometric. "Boarding Group 1, First Class," the gate agent announced. Isaiah stepped forward. He kept his head down, eyes scanning the floor, trying to remain invisible. He handed his boarding pass to the agent. The machine beeped green. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Washington," the agent said, barely looking up. Isaiah walked down the jet bridge, the sound of his boots heavy on the metal. As he stepped onto the plane, the atmosphere shifted. The smell of recycled air and expensive coffee hit him. He turned left into the first-class cabin. It was half empty. He found seat 1A, a wide, plush leather seat right by the window. He sat down, placing the briefcase on his lap. He couldn't stow it. Protocol 7 Alpha strictly forbade the asset from leaving physical contact with the courier until the transfer was complete. That was when he felt eyes on him. Standing at the front of the galley, arms crossed over a pristine navy blue uniform, was Brenda Miller. Brenda was the lead cabin manager, a woman who wore her authority like a weapon. Her name tag gleamed under the cabin lights, right next to a pin that read 15 years of service. She had a tight blonde bob and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that was currently upside down. She watched Isaiah settle into the seat. She looked at his hoodie. She looked at his boots. Then she looked at the briefcase. Isaiah saw her staring. He gave a polite, short nod. Brenda didn't nod back. She uncrossed her arms and walked over, her heels clicking aggressively on the thin carpet. "Sir," she said. Her voice was sickly sweet, but the volume was loud enough that the businessman in 1B looked up from his tablet. "I think you might be confused. This is first class." Isaiah looked up, his expression calm. "I know. Seat 1A." He held up his ticket stub. Brenda didn't take it. She just stared at it, then back at him. "Can I see your full boarding pass, please? Sometimes the system makes upgrade errors." Isaiah reached into his back pocket with his free hand, retrieved the pass, and handed it to her. She snatched it, scanning it with a small handheld device she pulled from her apron. She tapped the screen aggressively, waiting for a red light, a rejection, anything. The device chirped. Valid. 1A. Brenda's jaw tightened. She handed the ticket back, her nails scraping his hand. "Right. Well, you can't have that bag on your lap during taxi and takeoff. It needs to go in the overhead bin." "I can't do that, Mom," Isaiah said softly. "It stays with me." Federal aviation regulations state that all carry-on luggage must be stowed, Brenda recited, her voice rising. If you can't afford to check a bag, that's not my problem. But it can't be on your lap. It's not luggage, Isaiah said, his voice dropping an octave, meant only for her. It's a medical necessity. I have authorization to keep it with me. This was a half-truth, a standard cover line provided by the agency. Brenda scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound. Medical necessity? It looks like a gym bag from the 1980s. Sir, I'm going to ask you once. Put the bag up, or I'm going to have to escort you off the plane. We have elite members waiting for upgrades, and I won't have the cabin rules violated. Isaiah looked her dead in the eye. The warmth was gone from his face. I am not moving the bag. Check your manifest. There should be a note under special handling. Brenda didn't check the manifest. She was too far gone, running on a mixture of prejudice and a bad morning. She saw a man she deemed unworthy of the space, defying her command. I don't need to check anything, Brenda snapped. I am the flight manager. What I say goes. Last chance. Isaiah turned his head and looked out the window. I'm not moving. Brenda stood there for a heartbeat, her face turning a blotchy red. Fine, she hissed. Have it your way. She spun around and marched toward the cockpit, grabbing the interphone. She didn't whisper. She wanted the whole plane to hear. Captain, we have a non-compliant passenger in 1A. Possible intoxication, aggressive behavior. I'm going to need law enforcement at the gate immediately. The businessman in 1B shifted uncomfortably. He didn't really do anything, he muttered. Brenda shot the businessman a look that could curdle milk. Sir, please do not interfere with flight safety procedures. Isaiah closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. He just hoped the extraction team was monitoring the comms. 10 minutes passed. The flight was fully boarded, but the cabin door remained open. The humid Chicago air was starting to creep in, mixing with the tension that was thick enough to choke on. Passengers in economy were craning their necks, trying to see what the holdup was. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Some guy in first class is drunk. No, I heard he tried to hit the stewardess. In 1A, Isaiah sat like a statue. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. Tactical breathing. Brenda stood at the front of the cabin, arms crossed again, guarding the cockpit door like a sentry. She was making a show of checking her watch, tapping her foot, and glaring at Isaiah. She wanted him to feel the shame of delaying 200 people. Suddenly, 2 figures appeared in the jet bridge doorway. They weren't airport security. They were Chicago Police Department officers. One was a tall, older man with a graying mustache, Officer Kowalski. The other was younger, looking eager for action, Officer Miller, no relation to Brenda, though the irony was palpable. Brenda lit up. She rushed forward to meet them. Thank God, she said, her voice trembling with feigned distress. He's right there. Seat 1A. Officer Kowalski adjusted his belt and stepped onto the plane. He looked at Isaiah, who was still looking out the window. What's the problem, ma'am? He refused a direct order from the flight crew. Brenda lied, her voice pitching up. He became belligerent when I asked him to stow his bag. He's clutching it like it's full of... well, who knows? And I suspect he's using a fraudulent ticket. He doesn't fit the profile of our first-class passengers. Kowalski frowned. Belligerent? Did he threaten you? He was verbally abusive, Brenda added, adding another layer to the lie. And I don't feel safe flying with him behind me. Kowalski nodded and walked over to seat 1A. He loomed over Isaiah. Sir, Kowalski said, his voice deep and authoritative. I need you to look at me. Isaiah turned his head slowly. His eyes were clear, dark, and utterly unafraid. "Officer, the flight attendant says you're refusing to follow crew instructions," Kowalski said, "and that you're causing a disturbance. You need to grab your bag and come with us. We can sort this out on the jet bridge." "I haven't raised my voice," Isaiah said calmly, "and I cannot leave this seat. Not until we land in D.C. "Sir, the airline has the right to refuse service to anyone," the younger officer chimed in, stepping closer. "If you don't get up, we're going to have to drag you up, and that bag needs to go through security again if you're acting this suspicious." "The bag does not leave my person," Isaiah repeated. "Officer, I am asking you to call your dispatch. Give them my name, Isaiah Washington. Tell them to run a code, Indigo November." Brenda laughed out loud. It was a harsh, cackling sound. "Oh, listen to him. Now he's a spy? Indigo November. Sir, you watch too many movies. You're probably just carrying drugs." She turned to the passengers. "I apologize, everyone. We're just dealing with a delusional passenger. We'll be underway shortly." A woman in seat 2B, an elderly lady with pearls, leaned forward. "He really hasn't done anything, officer. She just yelled at him about the bag." "Stay out of this, ma'am," Brenda snapped, "unless you want to be offloaded too." Kowalski looked at Isaiah. He was experienced enough to know when someone was crazy and when someone was serious. The man in 1A didn't look crazy. He looked military. "Sir, I can't call in codes," Kowalski said, his tone softening slightly. "But you can't stay on this plane. The pilot has refused to fly with you on board, based on the flight manager's report. You are trespassing now." "I bought a ticket," Isaiah said. "I am a United States citizen, and I am on active duty." "You're in a hoodie, sir," Brenda interjected. "Stop the Stolen Valor Act. It's disrespectful to the real troops." That hit a nerve. Isaiah's jaw clenched. "Officer," Isaiah said, ignoring Brenda, "if you touch me, or if you attempt to remove this bag, you will be triggering a federal incident. I am giving you a chance to walk away." "Is that a threat?" The younger officer put his hand on his taser. "It's a warning," Isaiah said. "That's it," Brenda yelled. "He threatened a police officer. Get him off my plane, now!" Kowalski sighed. He didn't like this, but the airline was the customer, and the customer wanted the man gone. "Sir, stand up. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and trespassing." Kowalski reached out to grab Isaiah's left arm, the arm with the briefcase. As soon as Kowalski's hand touched the leather of the jacket, Isaiah moved. It wasn't a strike. It was a shift in leverage. He didn't fight back, but he revealed the cuff. He pulled his sleeve up. The steel handcuff gleamed under the cabin lights, chaining his wrist to the handle of the briefcase. But it wasn't a standard police cuff. It was black steel, stamped with a Department of Defense eagle and a red serial number. Kowalski froze. "What the officer muttered. "I told you," Isaiah said, his voice like gravel. "It doesn't leave my person." Brenda leaned in, squinting. "So he handcuffed himself to his bag? He's a lunatic. He's probably got a bomb in there. Officer, shoot him!" The cabin erupted in panic. "Bomb!" someone screamed. People in economy started unbuckling. "Sit down!" Kowalski roared at the passengers. He looked back at Isaiah. "Sir, unclip that bag. Now!" "I don't have the key," Isaiah said. "The key is in Washington, D.C. "Bullshit!" Brenda spat. "Officer, drag him out!" The younger officer lunged, grabbing Isaiah's right shoulder. "Get your hands off me," Isaiah said, his voice commanding. "You're resisting," the rookie shouted. He yanked Isaiah hard. Because of the angle, the briefcase jerked. A small red LED light on the handle of the briefcase turned from solid green to flashing yellow. A low, piercing beep began to emit from the bag. Beep! 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 Isaiah's eyes went wide. "You idiot," he whispered. You triggered the tamper alarm, Brenda screamed. It's a bomb! He armed it! It's not a bomb, Isaiah shouted, his voice finally rising, cracking with authority that silenced the room. It's a distress beacon. You just alerted the Pentagon that a courier is under attack. Brenda froze. The color drained from her face. The what? She stammered. You have exactly 3 minutes, Isaiah said, looking at his watch, then at Kowalski. Before the tarmac is swarmed, I suggest you tell your dispatch to clear the runway. Now. The beeping wasn't loud, but it was rhythmic, piercing, and relentless. Beep, beep, beep. In the confined space of the first-class cabin, the sound seemed to bounce off the walls, drilling into the psyche of everyone present. The LED light on the handle of the battered briefcase pulsed in time with the sound, casting a sickly yellow glow on Isaiah's handcuffed wrist. Brenda Miller took a step back, her back hitting the cockpit door. Her face, previously flushed with anger, was now an ashen grey. He's armed it, she whispered, her voice trembling. I told you, he's a terrorist. Why aren't you shooting him? Officer Kowalski held up a hand, silencing her. He was staring at the briefcase. He had been on the force for 30 years. He had seen homemade bombs, pipe bombs, and intricate IEDs in training videos. They were usually messy: wires, duct tape, cheap clocks. This was different. The briefcase looked old, but the interface near the handle was sleek, seamless, and unmistakably high-tech. And the stamp on the steel cuff, the Department of Defense Eagle, was looking more legitimate by the second. Lower your weapon, Kowalski muttered to the younger officer, Miller. But Sarge, he said, I said lower it, Kowalski barked. He looked at Isaiah. The man in seat 1A hadn't moved. He hadn't flinched. He was staring at his watch, counting down. What exactly did you just do? Kowalski asked, his voice low. I didn't do anything, Isaiah replied calmly, though his pulse was hammering. You did. The briefcase has a gyroscope and a pressure sensor. It detects struggle. It detects unauthorized removal attempts. When your partner yanked my arm, the system interpreted it as a hostile extraction event. Turn it off, Brenda screeched. Captain! Captain! Come out here! The cockpit door flew open. Captain Mark Anderson, a man with salt and pepper hair and 4 gold stripes on his shoulder, stepped out. He looked furious. What is going on out here? Anderson demanded. I have the tower screaming in my ear. They just ordered a complete ground stop for the entire terminal. They're diverting incoming flights. They said there's a level 1 security event on my aircraft. Anderson looked at the police, then at Brenda, and finally at the man in 1A. He heard the beeping. What is that noise? Anderson asked. This man brought a bomb on board, Brenda cried out, pointing a shaking finger at Isaiah. I tried to get him off, but he handcuffed himself to it and started the timer. Captain Anderson looked at Isaiah. He looked at the haircut, high and tight, recently cut. He looked at the posture. Anderson had flown F-16s in the Gulf War. He knew a soldier when he saw one. Son, Anderson said, ignoring Brenda. Is that ordnance? No, sir, Isaiah said respectfully. It's a secure courier interface, classification level, top secret ASCI. I am a Sergeant Major, United States Army, retired, currently contracting for the Defense Intelligence Agency. My orders are to deliver this package to the Pentagon by 1400 hours. Brenda scoffed. He's lying. He's wearing a hoodie. He looks like a thug. Shut up, Brenda, Captain Anderson snapped. The cabin went dead silent. Brenda's mouth fell open. The captain never spoke to the cabin crew like that. Sergeant Major, Anderson said, his voice respectful. The beacon. What does it signal? It signals that the asset is compromised, Isaiah explained. It alerts the nearest quick reaction force. Usually that means military police or the FBI. Since we are at O'Hare, I'd guess FBI and Homeland Security. As if on cue, the view out the window of the first-class cabin changed. The passengers on the left side of the plane gasped. "Oh my God," the businessman in 1B whispered. "Look." Racing across the tarmac, ignoring the taxiways and lane markers, were 4 black SUVs with flashing blue lights in the grilles. Behind them was a Bearcat armored vehicle. They were cutting directly across the grass, heading straight for the nose of Flight 492. The younger police officer, Miller, looked out the window and gulped. "Sarge, that's not airport security." Kowalski looked out. "No, that's the feds." The SUVs screeched to a halt in a semicircle around the jet bridge stairs. Doors flew open. Men in heavy tactical gear, carrying automatic rifles, poured out. They didn't look like they were there to negotiate. They looked like they were there to invade. Inside the cabin, the intercom crackled. It wasn't the flight deck speaking. It was a patch-through from the tower. "Flight 492, this is O'Hare Control. Do not, repeat, do not, open the cabin door. Armed federal agents are boarding the jet bridge. Place your hands on your heads. This is a federal containment operation." Brenda was hyperventilating now. "They're here to save us," she muttered to herself. "They're here to get the bomber." Isaiah closed his eyes and sighed. This is going to be a paperwork nightmare. The sound of heavy boots thundered down the jet bridge. It sounded like a stampede. "Everyone stay in your seats," Kowalski yelled, his hand hovering over his gun, unsure who the enemy was anymore. The cabin door, which was still open, was filled instantly by a wall of black uniforms. "Federal agents! Hands! Let me see hands!" The shout was deafening. 3 tactical officers stormed the first-class cabin, rifles raised. They swept the room in seconds. "Clear left! Clear right!" Then, a man in a suit walked through the phalanx of tactical gear. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Brenda's car, and he wore sunglasses despite being indoors. He held up a badge. "Special Agent Holloway, FBI," he announced. His voice was ice cold. He scanned the room and locked eyes with Isaiah. Then he looked at the flashing briefcase. Holloway didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. He walked straight past Brenda, past the captain, and past the police officers. He stopped in front of seat 1A. "Washington," Holloway said. "Holloway," Isaiah nodded. "You triggered the alarm," Holloway said. "Do you have any idea how much money it costs to shut down O'Hare for 10 minutes? "Tell it to the flight attendant," Isaiah said, gesturing with his free hand. "And the local PD." Holloway turned slowly. He lowered his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were sharp and unforgiving. He looked at Officer Kowalski. Then he looked at Brenda Miller. "Who is responsible for this man's detention?" Holloway asked. Brenda stepped forward, trying to regain her composure. She straightened her blazer. "I am. I'm the flight manager. That man is a threat to this aircraft. He refused to stow his luggage, he was belligerent, and he claimed to have a bomb. I want him arrested immediately." Holloway stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You want him arrested?" Holloway repeated flatly. "Yes, he disrupted my flight." Holloway turned back to one of the tactical officers. "Secure the perimeter. No one leaves this plane. Not the passengers, not the pilots, and certainly not the crew." He turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, you just interfered with a Level 1 national security courier. You didn't just disrupt a flight. You disrupted a classified operation." Holloway's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "And you detained a man who has a higher clearance than the president of the airline you work for." The silence that followed Agent Holloway's declaration was heavier than the humid air outside. Brenda Miller blinked, her brain struggling to process the information. It contradicted everything she believed about the world. To her, Power looked like a suit, a uniform, or a platinum frequent flyer card. Power did not look like a black man in a hoodie and Timberland boots. That's impossible, Brenda stammered, her voice losing its edge. Look at him. He's nobody. Holloway didn't even blink. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small electronic pad. He tapped it twice and held it up. A holographic projection of a document hovered in the air, a digital warrant. Isaiah Washington, Holloway read aloud, his voice projecting to the back of the cabin. Silver Star recipient, Purple Heart, former Delta Force operator, current status, Tier 1 courier for the Defense Intelligence Agency, authorization code Archangel. The passengers in first class were now leaning over their seats, rapt with attention. The businessman in 1B looked at Isaiah with wide, awe-struck eyes. He has a Silver Star, the businessman whispered. Brenda felt the floor tilting beneath her. But the bag, he wouldn't stow the bag. It's FAA regulation. Federal National Security statutes supersede FAA cabin regulations, ma'am, Holloway snapped. If he says the bag stays with him, the bag stays with him. If he says he needs to sit in the cockpit, you give him the pilot's seat. That is how this works. Holloway turned to Officer Kowalski. The older cop looked pale. He had holstered his weapon and was wringing his hands. And you, Holloway said, addressing the police. You put hands on him? We were responding to a disturbance call, Agent, Kowalski said, his voice cracking. The flight manager stated he was aggressive. We were just following protocol. You yanked his arm, Isaiah spoke up from the seat. The beeping had finally stopped, replaced by a solid blue light on the handle. You tried to forcibly separate me from the package. That's what triggered the beacon. Holloway shook his head, looking at the officers with disdain. You're lucky the countermeasures on that case were set to passive. If they were set to active, you'd be missing a hand right now, officer. The rookie officer, Miller, looked like he was going to be sick. Uncuff him, Holloway ordered. Not from the bag, from you. Kowalski fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped them once before managing to unlock the handcuffs he had placed on Isaiah just minutes ago. I'm sorry, sir, Kowalski mumbled to Isaiah. I didn't know. Isaiah rubbed his wrist. You didn't verify. You just listened to her. He nodded toward Brenda. Holloway turned his full attention back to Brenda. She was cornered now, physically and verbally. She was standing near the galley, clutching a coffee pot as if it were a shield. I was doing my job, Brenda cried, tears starting to form. Tears of frustration, not remorse. He didn't present himself as, I have a duty to protect this plane. You profiled him, Holloway corrected her. Let's call it what it is. You saw a man you didn't think belonged in your first-class cabin, and you decided to flex your authority. And when he didn't bow down, you escalated it. I deny that, Brenda said, her chin trembling. I treat all passengers with respect. We'll see about that, Holloway said, because under the Patriot Act and the Defense Authorization Act, interfering with a courier operation is a federal felony. We're going to pull the cockpit voice recorder and the cabin audio. Brenda's eyes went wide. You can't do that. I just did, Holloway said. Captain Anderson? The captain stepped forward. He looked at Brenda with pure disappointment. Yes, Agent? I'm grounding this bird, Holloway said. This plane is now a crime scene. I need everyone off. We need to debrief every passenger as a witness to this incident. Understood, Captain Anderson said. He keyed the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Due to a security incident involving the flight crew, this flight is cancelled. Please gather your belongings and exit the aircraft. Federal agents will guide you." A groan went up from the economy section, but in first class, nobody moved. They were too fascinated by the drama unfolding in the front. "Wait," Brenda said, panic setting in. "Cancelled. You can't cancel the flight. The airline will lose thousands. I'll be blamed." "You will be blamed," Holloway confirmed. "But that's the least of your worries." Holloway turned to Isaiah. "Grab your gear, Sergeant Major. We have a helicopter waiting on the south tarmac. We'll get you to D.C. The package is late." Isaiah stood up. He stretched his legs, the heavy briefcase hanging naturally from his left hand. He looked tall, imposing, and dignified. He adjusted his hoodie. He walked past Kowalski, who wouldn't meet his eyes. He walked past the rookie cop, who stepped back as if Isaiah were radioactive. Then he stopped in front of Brenda Miller. She was trembling, clutching the counter. She looked up at him, waiting for him to yell, to scream, to call her names. She expected him to act the way she had accused him of acting. Isaiah just looked at her. His expression was one of pity. "It costs nothing to be kind, Mum," Isaiah said softly, "and it costs nothing to listen." He turned and walked toward the door. "Wait," Brenda yelled, desperation taking over. "You can't just leave. You ruined my life. You set me up." Isaiah didn't turn back. He walked onto the jet bridge, flanked by the tactical team. But the nightmare for Brenda was just beginning. As Isaiah left, another man in a suit entered. This one wasn't FBI. He was holding a clipboard and wearing a badge that said FAA Inspector, and behind him was a woman with a severe haircut and a briefcase of her own. She was the regional director for the airline, Brenda's boss's boss. The regional director didn't look at the passengers. She looked straight at Brenda. "Ms. Miller," the director said, her voice cutting through the noise of the disembarking passengers. "Gather your personal effects. You are relieved of duty pending an immediate investigation." But Sarah," Brenda pleaded, using the director's first name. He had a weapon. I was protecting the brand." "You just cost us a government contract," the director hissed. "Do you know who that man works for? Our airline transports 40% of the military personnel for the DoD. The Pentagon just called the CEO. They are threatening to pull our certification." Brenda felt her knees give out. She slumped into the jump seat. "Officer," Holloway called out from the doorway, turning back one last time. Kowalski looked up. "Yes, Agent?" "Ms. Miller is now a suspect in a federal investigation regarding false statements to law enforcement and interference with federal agents. I suggest you read her rights." The color drained from Brenda's face completely. The irony hit her like a physical blow. She had called the police to arrest the man in 1A. Now, the handcuffs were coming for her. Kowalski looked at Brenda. The sympathy he might have had for a fellow authority figure was gone. She had lied to him. She had humiliated him. She had almost gotten him killed by a federal tactical team. Kowalski pulled his handcuffs back out. "Brenda Miller," Kowalski said, his voice flat. "Please stand up and turn around." The interrogation room at the precinct was cold, smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Brenda Miller sat at a metal table, her hands uncuffed but trembling. Across from her sat her union-appointed lawyer, a tired man named Gary Fletcher, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "They're overreacting, Gary," Brenda insisted, her voice shrill. "It was a misunderstanding. I thought he was a threat. I have discretion as a flight manager. The airline will back me up. I have 15 years of perfect service." Gary looked at her over the rim of his glasses. He slid a tablet across the table. "Brenda," Gary said softly, "you haven't seen the internet, have you?" "I don't care about the internet," she snapped. "I care about my job." "You don't have a job anymore, Brenda. The airline issued a press release 20 minutes ago. They fired you for cause, effective immediately. They also apologized to the Department of Defense and Mr. Washington. Brenda felt the blood drain from her face. They can't do that. Without a hearing. Watch the video, Gary said, tapping the screen. Brenda looked down. It was a shaky video, filmed vertically from seat 2C. It was clear as day. The caption read, "Karen gets flight cancelled after harassing black veteran. Justice for Isaiah." The video showed everything. It showed Isaiah sitting calmly. It showed Brenda's aggressive posture. It picked up the audio perfectly. Medical necessity? It looks like a gym bag from the 1980s. I'm going to have to escort you off the plane. We have elite members waiting for upgrades. And then, the lie. The video cut to her, speaking to the police. He refused a direct order. He became belligerent. He was verbally abusive. Gary stopped the video. Millions of views, Brenda. 2 million in the last hour. The comments, well, you don't want to read them. But the problem isn't the public opinion. The problem is the evidence. Gary leaned in. You lied to a federal law enforcement officer. That's on tape now. You filed a false report claiming he was abusive when the video clearly shows he was whispering. And worst of all, you triggered a frantic emergency response that cost the city of Chicago and the federal government hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was scared, Brenda cried. No, you weren't, Gary said, his voice devoid of sympathy. You were arrogant. And now the U.S. attorney is getting involved. They aren't just charging you with filing a false report. They are looking at interference with a flight crew, ironically, and deprivation of rights under color of law. They want to make an example out of you. Brenda put her head in her hands. What do I do? You pray, Gary said, packing up his briefcase. And you plead guilty. Because if this goes to trial, and you put that veteran on the stand, the jury will destroy you. Meanwhile, miles away in a secure briefing room at the Pentagon, Isaiah Washington was finally uncuffed from the briefcase. A general shook his hand. Sorry about the mess in Chicago, Sergeant Major, the general said. We saw the footage. You kept your cool. Just doing the job, sir, Isaiah said, rubbing his wrist. The airline wants to offer you a settlement, the general noted. A big one, to keep you from suing them into bankruptcy. Isaiah thought for a moment. He thought about the look on Brenda's face. He thought about the young officer, Miller, who had almost tased him. I don't want their money, Isaiah said. I want them to change their training protocols, and I want that manager to stand in open court and admit she lied. Not a plea deal behind closed doors. I want it on the record. 6 months later, the steps of the Cook County Courthouse were nearly invisible beneath a sea of news cameras and satellite vans. This wasn't just a local legal dispute. The trial of United States versus Brenda Miller had become a national referendum on bias, authority, and accountability. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with a humid, suffocating tension. Every seat in the gallery was filled. There were veterans in biker cuts, civil rights activists, and former airline employees who had stories of their own. Brenda Miller sat at the defendant's table, her posture rigid. She had rejected the plea deal, a generous offer of probation and a fine, because her pride simply wouldn't allow it. In her mind, she hadn't committed a crime. She was a martyr for airline safety, a diligent employee persecuted by a woke mob and a misunderstanding. She had liquidated her savings to hire a high-priced defense attorney, a slick operator who promised he could spin the narrative and paint her as the victim of a stressful work environment. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman with steel-grey hair and a reputation for absolute zero tolerance for theatrics, called the court to order. Brenda took the stand in her own defense. It was her moment to tell her truth. At first, she appeared composed, answering her lawyer's questions with rehearsed, tearful poise. "I just felt that he didn't fit the profile of a first-class passenger," Brenda said, her voice trembling slightly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "You have to understand the pressure we are under. We are the last line of defense at 30,000 feet. His clothes looked dirty. He was hiding his bag aggressively. I was terrified he had a weapon." Then the prosecutor, a sharp, relentless attorney named David Ross, stood up for cross-examination. He didn't yell. He didn't pace. He simply walked to the podium and placed a photo on the overhead projector. "Dirty?" Ross asked, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Ms. Miller, this is a crime scene photo taken of Mr. Washington's attire on the day in question. He is wearing designer Japanese denim and a $200 hoodie. His boots are scuff-free. Is it possible, Ms. Miller, that by dirty you actually meant something else?" Brenda bristled. "No, I meant unkempt. He looked like a thug." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Brenda realized her mistake too late, but Ross was already moving in for the kill. "And you claimed in your police statement that he was belligerent," Ross continued, tapping a button to play an audio clip. The courtroom was filled with the sound of the cabin recording. "I can't do that, ma'am. It stays with me." Isaiah's voice on the recording was soft, polite, and deeply calm. Then Brenda's voice sliced through the speakers, shrill and ear-piercing. "I am the flight manager. What I say goes." Ross stopped the tape. He looked at the jury, then back at Brenda. "Mr. Washington called you ma'am," he whispered. "Your voice, however, was recorded at 80 decibels. You were screaming at a passenger who was sitting still. At what point, exactly, was he belligerent?" "It was his tone," Brenda insisted, her face flushing a blotchy red as her narrative crumbled. "It was threatening. He had a look in his eyes. I felt unsafe." "You felt unsafe," Ross repeated flatly. "So you called the police to remove a man because of a look in his eyes." "I was protecting the plane," Brenda shrieked, losing her composure entirely. Then came the moment the entire room had been waiting for. The bailiff opened the heavy oak doors, and the prosecution called their star witness. "The people call Sergeant Major Isaiah Washington." The room went deadly silent. Isaiah walked in, but the man in the hoodie was gone. In his place walked a figure of undeniable authority. He was wearing his army dress blues, the fabric immaculate, the creases sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his chest that drew every eye. It was heavy with ribbons and medals, the silver star, the bronze star, and the purple heart with multiple clusters. He walked with a stiff, painful grace, the result of injuries sustained defending the very freedoms Brenda had tried to strip from him. He took the stand, swore the oath, and sat down. He didn't look at Brenda. He looked past her, as if she were merely a ghost. "Mr. Washington," Ross asked gently, "how did it feel when Ms. Miller announced to the entire plane that you were a drug dealer or a fraud, when she tried to have you arrested?" Isaiah leaned into the microphone. His voice was deep, resonating off the wood-paneled walls. "It didn't feel like anything new, sir. I've fought for this country in 3 different combat zones. I've been shot at, blown up, and stitched back together more times than I care to count." He paused, his eyes scanning the jury. "In war, you learn to identify threats. But I also learned that the enemy isn't always holding a gun. Sometimes, the enemy is just someone who thinks you don't belong in the room. Someone who thinks your existence is a violation of their rules." The jury was captivated. Several jurors were wiping tears from their eyes. "Did you threaten her?" Ross asked. "No." "Did you refuse to comply with safety regulations?" "I followed Protocol 7 to Alpha for classified courier transport," Isaiah stated firmly. "Ms. Miller refused to check the manifest where my clearance was listed. She chose to escalate instead of verify. She wanted a confrontation, not a solution." The trial concluded swiftly. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, a clear sign that there was no debate in the deliberation room. When they returned, the foreman stood up. "We find the defendant, Brenda Miller, guilty on all counts." Brenda let out a sharp, gasping sob, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked at her lawyer for help, but he just shook his head, closing his briefcase. Judge Reynolds adjusted her spectacles and looked down at Brenda from the bench. Her expression was one of profound disappointment. "Ms. Miller, please stand," the judge ordered. Brenda stood, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the table. "You used the police as a personal weapon to enforce your own prejudices," Judge Reynolds said, her voice cutting through the room. "You wasted valuable law enforcement resources, you grounded a commercial airliner, and you attempted to humiliate a decorated war hero. Throughout this trial, you have shown no remorse, only arrogance and a sense of entitlement." The judge paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I sentence you to 24 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation." Brenda's knees buckled, but the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, due to your gross interference with flight crew operations and federal security, you are hereby placed on the federal no-fly list. You will never set foot on a commercial aircraft in the United States again." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Brenda screamed, a raw, guttural sound of despair, as the bailiff moved behind her. This time there was no hesitation. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. These weren't the metaphorical handcuffs she had feared. They were real, and they were tight. As she was led away, weeping, Isaiah Washington stood up, gathered his cover, and walked out into the sunlight, finally free. 3 years passed. The relentless news cycle churned forward, burying the story of Flight 492 under fresh scandals and new outrages. The viral video that had once played on loop in every living room in America eventually faded from the trending tabs, replaced by the next big thing. But for the 2 people at the center of that storm, the moment in Chicago remained frozen in time, a divergent point that sent their lives on 2 violently different trajectories. For Isaiah Washington, the incident became a catalyst for something far greater than vindication. He had fully retired from active courier duty, his days of transporting classified secrets in handcuffed briefcases behind him. The settlement money the airline had forced upon him, a sum meant to buy his silence, was instead used to amplify his voice. He founded 1A Logistics in Washington, D.C., a specialized firm dedicated to hiring veterans who, like him, struggled to find their footing in a civilian world that didn't understand them. The company was a massive success, but Isaiah's greatest victory was silent. He still traveled frequently, always in seat 1A. But now, the atmosphere on the plane was different. The airline had instituted the Washington Protocol, a mandatory training module for all flight crews on how to interact with high-security personnel and diverse passengers. When Isaiah boarded a plane now, he wasn't met with suspicion. He was met with a nod of recognition and a quiet, "Welcome back, Sergeant Major." He had turned his humiliation into a legacy of respect. Brenda Miller's fate, however, proved that karma is not always a lightning bolt that strikes from the sky. Sometimes it is a slow, grinding erosion, a rust that eats away at the foundation of a life until the whole structure collapses. Brenda was released from federal prison after serving 18 months for good behavior. She walked out of the gates expecting to rebuild, but she found nothing but rubble. Her husband, a senior pilot who couldn't bear the public shame or the draining legal fees, had filed for divorce while she was still inside. He didn't even meet her at the release center. He just sent a process server with papers. She had lost her pension. She had lost her suburban home with the manicured lawn. But most devastatingly, she had lost her identity. For 15 years, she had been a flight manager, a woman who commanded the sky. Now, she was a felon on the federal no-fly list. She was grounded in the most absolute sense of the word, trapped on the earth she used to look down upon. Broke and unemployable in her old industry, Brenda was forced to move back to her childhood town in rural Ohio to live with her elderly mother. The quiet of the countryside wasn't peaceful to her. It was suffocating. She applied for office jobs, receptionist roles, even call centers. But in the digital age, a background check was just a Google search away. No one wanted to hire the woman who had become the face of discrimination. One rainy Tuesday night, Brenda stood behind the counter of a dingy convenience store at a highway gas station. This was her reality now. The graveyard shift, minimum wage, and the smell of stale coffee and gasoline. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering with an annoying buzz that grated on her nerves. She was wiping down the counter for the 10th time when the bell above the door chimed. A customer walked in, shaking off the rain. It was a young black man, perhaps barely 20. He was wearing a dark, oversized hoodie with the hood pulled up against the cold, and he carried a heavy backpack slung over one shoulder. Brenda froze. The old instinct, that toxic, reflexive mix of fear and judgment, bubbled up in her throat instantly. It was muscle memory. Her eyes darted to his backpack. What's in there? Why is his hood up? He doesn't look like he buys gas here. The urge to exert control, to tell him to lower his hood or leave his bag at the front, surged through her veins. She gripped the rag in her hand, her knuckles turning white. But then she caught her own reflection in the plexiglass partition that separated her from the customers. She didn't see the polished flight manager in the navy blue uniform anymore. She saw a tired, broken woman in a cheap red polyester vest. She saw deep lines etched around her mouth and eyes that looked hollow and defeated. She looked at the name tag pinned to her chest. It didn't say lead cabin manager. It just said Brenda. The young man walked to the counter, oblivious to her internal war. He placed a bottle of soda and a bag of chips on the counter. He looked tired, likely a college student pulling an all-nighter or a kid working a late shift just like her. He smiled at her, a genuine, tired smile. "Just this, please, Mom." The word Mom hit her like a physical blow. It was the same word Isaiah had used. Brenda hesitated, her throat tight. She looked at the young man, really looked at him, and forced the old Brenda to die a little more. "That'll be $4, she whispered, her voice cracking. He handed her a $5 bill. Brenda fumbled with the register, her hands shaking as she popped the drawer. She reached for the singles, but he waved his hand. "Keep the change," he said softly. "Have a good night." "Thank you," she managed to say. As the door chimed again, and the young man walked out into the rain, Brenda watched him go. She didn't call the police. She didn't scream for a manager. She just stood there in the oppressive silence of the empty store, surrounded by rows of candy bars and cigarettes. She looked down at the dollar bill in the register, a tip from a man she would have once tried to have arrested. She picked up her rag and started wiping the counter again, a task that would never be finished. She realized then that while Isaiah Washington was somewhere above the clouds, flying free in the life he deserved. She was exactly where she belonged, grounded, alone, and left to sweep up the mess she had made. And that is how one moment of arrogance grounded a flight and ruined a life. Brenda thought she had all the power because she wore a uniform, but she learned the hard way that true power is quiet, composed, and carries a badge you can't see until it's too late. If you believe that respect should be given to everyone, regardless of what they wear or how they look, hit that like button right now. It helps get this story out to more people. And what do you think? Did the judge give Brenda a harsh enough sentence? Or did she get off easy? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story about karma hitting back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.